History Secrets.
We live in a world where almost everything seems solid. Money, technology, institutions. But some philosophical ideas suggest that many of these things may be just collective constructions. An ancient metaphor helps to understand this possibility. It was proposed by the Greek philosopher Plato, the famous allegory of the cave. In this story, people live chained inside a cave since birth. They cannot turn their bodies. They can only look at a wall. Behind them there is a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, figures pass by that project shadows on the wall. The prisoners see only these shadows, and they believe that this is reality. For Plato, this metaphor described the human condition. Much of what we consider reality may be just representation, interpretations, narratives, social constructions. Some contemporary thinkers use this metaphor to analyze the modern economic system. Money, for example. For much of history, currencies were linked to physical resources. Gold, silver, precious metals. But in the current system, most currencies have no physical backing. They are fiat currencies. Their value fundamentally depends on collective trust. They exist because everyone agrees to believe in them. Jiang warns Sneeko about the end. When billions of people accept a monetary system, it becomes functional, but this functionality depends on shared belief. If trust disappears, value can disappear as well. This principle has occurred many times in economic history. Currencies collapsed. Financial empires fell. Monetary systems were replaced. This perspective leads some analysts to question the traditional concept of wealth. If money depends on collective belief, then perhaps true wealth lies in other elements. Knowledge, creativity, ability to adapt, immunity, social influence. These assets do not depend on a specific financial system. A person can lose money, can lose access to platforms, can even lose social status. But knowledge and skills remain. They follow the individual anywhere. This idea appears frequently in debates about the future of society, especially in scenarios where technology, economy, and politics undergo rapid transformations. Some observers believe we are entering a period of global transition, a period in which old structures may be replaced by new forms of social organization. Among these transformations, one of the most discussed involves the advancement of artificial intelligence. In recent years, massive investments have been directed toward the development of increasingly sophisticated systems. These systems are already beginning to influence fundamental areas: communication, economy, education, security. Some analysts see this simply as technological progress. Others raise concerns about possible mechanisms of social control, surveillance systems, algorithms capable of monitoring behavior, platforms capable of influencing opinions. These discussions frequently appear in debates about the future of digital democracy. There is also growing concern about technological dependence. As digital technologies become essential to daily life, many traditional skills begin to disappear. Cooking, producing food, repairing equipment, solving problems without the help of digital systems. Some critics argue that this loss of autonomy may make societies more vulnerable. If a population depends completely on complex technological systems, any disruption can generate deep crises. On the other hand, other experts believe that technology can also expand human capabilities, connect people, expand knowledge, create new economic opportunities. The truth probably lies somewhere between these two views. Technology is not just a tool. It also redefines how societies function. And every new innovation brings new possibilities, but also new challenges. Another frequently discussed aspect is the human capacity for adaptation. Even in scenarios of deep crisis, human societies have historically demonstrated a great capacity for reorganization. Communities emerge, improvised solutions appear, networks of cooperation are formed. In moments of institutional collapse, people often resort to the oldest element of human organization: direct cooperation. Neighbors helping neighbors, local groups solving problems collectively. This capacity for adaptation has been a central feature of human history. For this reason, some thinkers argue that the true security of a society is not only in its institutions, but also in the creativity and resilience of its citizens. Shared knowledge, practical skills, mutual trust. In the face of an uncertain future, perhaps the most important question is not just which economic system will dominate the world, but which human capabilities will continue to be essential, regardless of the system. Learn, create, cooperate, adapt. If there is one constant in human history, it is that change has always happened. Empires have risen and disappeared. Technologies have transformed societies. Ideas have changed the way we understand the world. And in the midst of all these transformations, one thing remains: the human capacity to imagine new paths. Because, in the end, perhaps true wealth is not in the systems we created, but in the ability to recreate them when necessary. When we analyze the future of modern societies, an inevitable question arises: what happens when systems that seem permanent begin to change? Throughout history, major economic transformations have occurred repeatedly. Commercial empires disappeared. Currencies lost value. New financial systems emerged. These changes almost never happen silently. They usually generate fear, instability, and many interpretations about what will come next. Some analysts believe that the current world may be entering another one of these transitional phases: the growth of global debt, the digitization of money, the emergence of digital currencies. All of this indicates that the financial system may be undergoing a deep reconfiguration. Within this scenario, intense debates arise about the future of the economy. Some argue that new decentralized technologies can transform the monetary system. Others believe that governments will strengthen control through digital currencies issued by central banks. These currencies, known as CBTS, are already being studied by several countries. The introduction of these technologies raises new questions: privacy, economic autonomy, capacity to monitor transactions. For some specialists, digital financial systems can increase efficiency and security. For others, they may expand the reach of economic surveillance mechanisms. This debate connects to a broader discussion about technology and power. Throughout history, those who control information often control society. In the digital age, data has become a strategic resource. Large technological platforms accumulate enormous amounts of information about human behavior. These data make it possible to understand social patterns with unprecedented precision. Preferences, habits, routines, interactions. Everything can be analyzed by algorithms. This capability creates new possibilities, but also raises concerns. How are these data used? Who has access to them? What limits should exist? These questions are at the center of contemporary debates about artificial intelligence and digital governance. Some observers fear that societies excessively dependent on digital systems may become more vulnerable to sophisticated forms of influence. Algorithms can suggest content. Platforms can shape collective attention. Automated systems can guide decisions. On the other hand, technology can also expand human capabilities in extraordinary ways. Global accessible education, collaboration between people from different countries, instant access to knowledge accumulated over centuries. These tools can strengthen individuals and communities. Like almost all major technological transformations in history, the final impact will depend on how these tools are used. Technology is not destiny. It is an instrument, and instruments can be used in different ways. In this context, some thinkers once again emphasize a simple ideas: human autonomy, ability to learn, ability to think critically, ability to cooperate with others. These qualities remain fundamental regardless of technological or economic structures. At the same time, crises and transformations often awaken what is most resilient in human societies. When institutions fail, local communities often take on essential roles. Informal support networks emerge. New forms of organization appear. Collective creativity finds unexpected paths. This pattern can be observed in countless moments in history. After wars, during economic collapses, in periods of radical technological change, societies go through turbulence, but they also develop new solutions. Perhaps the central question is not whether the world will change. History shows that change is inevitable. The real question is how individuals and communities will respond to these changes. Some will respond with fear, others with adaptation, others still with innovation. Each generation faces its own historical challenges, and each generation redefines the future in unexpected ways. If the global economic system undergoes a significant transformation in the coming decades, perhaps the most important skills will not be only financial, but human. Continuously learn, build relationships of trust, develop independent thinking, cultivate imagination. Because, in the end, economic systems can change, technologies can evolve, institutions can disappear, but the human capacity to create new paths remains. Perhaps it is this capacity that has always allowed humanity to go through periods of uncertainty. And perhaps it is what will continue to define the next chapter of our history. Throughout this documentary, we explored evidence, accounts, and discoveries that attempt to explain this historical event. But one question remains unanswered. If everything happened exactly as we believe, then why are there so many contradictory records? Why do certain details seem to have disappeared from official history? Perhaps because this mystery has not yet been fully resolved. And perhaps there are still clues waiting to be discovered. Because some secrets of history are still waiting to be revealed.
History secrets.
There is a very popular narrative about the economic history of the United States. It is often summarized in a phrase known all over the world: the American dream. According to this narrative, anyone could start from nothing, work hard, be creative, and eventually build a massive fortune. For decades, stories of great entrepreneurs were used as examples of this ideal. Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller. These names became symbols of American economic rise. Vanderbilt built a vast railroad empire. Carnegie dominated the steel industry. Rockefeller turned oil into one of the largest fortunes in history. But the emergence of these economic giants also raises an interesting question. How did individuals manage to control entire sectors of the economy? Entire industries? Railroads, steel, oil, finance. The answer involves several historical factors: accelerated industrialization, emerging technologies, rapidly expanding markets, and increasingly complex financial structures. During the late 19th century, the United States went through a period known as the Age of Monopolies, or the Gilded Age. During this time, large industrial conglomerates began to dominate entire markets. Companies absorbed competitors, formed trusts, and established enormous economic influence. At the same time, the financial system was also transforming. Major bankers like J.P. Morgan played a central role in organizing capital and stabilizing markets. This process would eventually lead to the creation of important financial institutions, among them, the Federal Reserve System in the early 20th century. Another decisive moment occurred after World War II. In 1944, international leaders gathered to create a new global monetary system. This system became known as Bretton Woods. It established that the US dollar would be the main international reserve currency, and that the dollar would be tied to gold. For a few decades, this arrangement helped stabilize the global financial system. But in 1971, President Richard Nixon announced the end of the dollar's convertibility into gold. The international monetary system then shifted to operate with pure fiat currencies. In this new system, the value of money came to depend mainly on trust in issuing governments and economic stability. At the same time, another element reinforced the global role of the dollar. International oil trade. A large portion of energy transactions began to be conducted in dollars. This arrangement became known as the petrodollar system. These mechanisms helped consolidate the central role of the United States in the global economy during the 20th century. But they also generated debates about the concentration of economic power. Large corporations, global financial institutions, and emerging technological networks began to exert increasing influence. In the late 20th and early 21st century, a new generation of economic giants emerged. Technology companies, digital platforms, social networks, search engines. Some of them grew from technologies originally developed in academic or government contexts. This phenomenon fueled new discussions about the role of technological innovation. To what extent technological advances come from private initiatives, and to what extent they depend on research funded by governments or public institutions. The history of the Internet illustrates this dynamic well. The initial infrastructure of the network was developed from research projects funded by the United States government. Later, private companies transformed this technology into global platforms. This type of interaction between the state, science, and the market has been common at various moments in economic history. Many technological advances emerged from public research programs, then were adapted for commercial applications. Over time, these transformations have profoundly shaped the global economy. New industrial sectors, new forms of communication, new structures of economic power. But they also raised important questions. Who controls fundamental technologies? Who defines the rules of the financial system? And how to balance innovation with a fair distribution of opportunities? These questions remain at the center of the debate about the future of the global economy. As new technologies emerge and financial systems evolve, the relationship between economic power and political power remains one of the most complex themes in modern history. Perhaps the true lesson of this story is that economic systems are never static. They evolve, they adapt, and sometimes undergo profound transformations. And each of these transformations reshapes once again the question that follows all modern societies: who really controls economic power? As we observe the development of the modern economy, we notice that major cycles of growth are often followed by periods of crisis. This pattern has repeated itself many times over the last 2 centuries. Rapid economic expansions, financial bubbles, and then collapses that redefine the system. One of the most striking examples occurred in 1929. The crash of the New York Stock Exchange triggered one of the largest economic crises in history. Millions of people lost their jobs. Banks failed. Companies disappeared. This event became known as the Great Depression. Crises of this kind often expose structural weaknesses in the economic system: concentration of wealth, excessive debt, highly speculative markets. After World War II, the world tried to create mechanisms to prevent similar crises. International institutions were founded: the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the Bretton Woods system itself. These structures aim to bring greater stability to the global financial system. For a few decades, this model contributed to a period of relatively stable economic growth. But over time, new pressures emerged: accelerated globalization, expansion of credit, international financial integration. These transformations increased the complexity of the economic system. Financial markets became increasingly interconnected. Crises that were once regional began to have global impact. The financial crisis of 2008 was a clear example of this new reality. Problems in the American housing market quickly spread through banks and financial institutions around the world. Governments had to intervene to prevent even greater collapses. These episodes reinforce a central characteristic of the modern economic system. It depends deeply on trust. Trust in institutions, trust in currencies, trust in markets. When this trust is shaken, chain reactions can occur. Investors withdraw capital. Banks restrict credit. Companies reduce investments. The result can be a generalized economic slowdown. But crises also tend to generate structural changes. After the Great Depression, new financial regulations emerged. After the 2008 crisis, central banks began adopting more aggressive monetary policies. And today, new discussions are underway about the future of the economic system. Among the most debated topics are technological transformations, digital currencies, artificial intelligence, automation. These innovations can profoundly change how wealth is created and distributed. Technology companies have become some of the most influential institutions on the planet. They control platforms used by billions of people, manage flows of information, and accumulate massive amounts of data. This new scenario raises important questions about economic governance: how to balance innovation with fair competition, how to avoid excessive concentration of power, how to ensure that technological benefits are widely distributed. Governments around the world are trying to respond to these questions. Some advocate for greater regulation of large technology platforms. Others argue that innovation should occur with minimal intervention. Reality will likely require some kind of balance. Technology will continue to advance. Markets will continue to evolve. And institutions will need to adapt to new conditions. If there is one constant in economic history, it is that no system remains exactly the same for long. Currencies change. Institutions change. Centers of economic power shift. Over the centuries, the world has witnessed the rise of various economic powers: Mediterranean trading empires, European maritime nations, industrial revolutions, and more recently, digital globalization. Each period brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. New models of economic organization emerged, and societies adapted to them. Perhaps the present moment is just another chapter in this long history of transformation. A period in which emerging technologies, geopolitical changes, and new economic models are reshaping the map of global power. The final outcome is still uncertain, but one thing seems clear: the economy of the future will likely be very different from the one we know today. And as has always happened throughout history, those who better understand these changes will have a greater ability to navigate this new scenario. Because in the end, economic systems are reflections of the societies that create them. and societies are always in motion. The history of humanity is a journey, filled with discoveries, enigmas, and mysteries. Some have been understood, others still challenge our understanding. And it is precisely in these mysteries that we find the most fascinating questions. Subscribe to the channel and continue exploring the secrets of history. Because some secrets of history are still waiting to be revealed.
History secrets.
In recent decades, the global political system has undergone profound transformations. Some analysts argue that part of the behavior of major powers, especially the United States, can only be understood through a deeper logic. A logic that is not always explicit, but that shapes strategic decisions in a consistent way. According to some interpretations, what is often perceived as arrogance may actually be a reflection of structural positioning within the international system. A position of dominance, influence, and global responsibility. When a country occupies a central position in the world order, its decisions tend to have impacts far beyond its own borders. Economic decisions, military actions, diplomatic strategies. All of these can affect multiple regions simultaneously. This creates a type of behavior that, from the outside, may appear unilateral, or even insensitive to the interests of other nations. But from an internal perspective, these actions may be seen as necessary to maintain stability within the system itself, preserving alliances, protecting trade routes, maintaining influence. Some scholars argue that large powers often operate under a different perception of risk, because the cost of inaction can be interpreted as greater than the cost of intervention. Within this logic, acting decisively, even in controversial ways, may be understood as a strategy to prevent larger instabilities, or to preserve a favorable balance of power. Another important factor is the historical experience of each nation. The United States, for example, developed throughout the 20th century as a central actor in multiple global conflicts, world wars, Cold War, regional interventions. These experiences helped shape a strategic culture based on projection of power, technological superiority, and global presence. In this context, maintaining leadership may require constant demonstration of strength, both to allies and to potential adversaries. This dynamic can create what some analysts describe as a cycle of reinforcement. The more a country acts to maintain its position, the more it is expected to continue acting in the same way. Over time, this can generate perceptions of arrogance, especially when actions are taken without broad international consensus. But it is also important to consider that the international system itself lacks a central authority. There is no global government capable of enforcing rules uniformly. This means that, in many situations, countries act based on their own interpretation of security and interest. For a dominant power, this often translates into a greater willingness to intervene, to shape outcomes, to influence global events. However, this behavior can generate resistance. Other nations may perceive these actions as threats to their own sovereignty, or as attempts at domination. This creates a dynamic of tension, where actions intended to maintain stability can, paradoxically, generate instability. Another relevant aspect is the difference between internal and external perception. Internally, actions may be justified as necessary, strategic, defensive, Externally, the same actions may be interpreted as aggressive, unilateral, or disproportionate. This divergence of perception is a common feature of international politics, and it helps explain why the same event can be interpreted in radically different ways depending on the observer. From a structural point of view, the behavior of major powers often follows patterns: maintenance of influence zones, protection of economic interests, containment of rivals. These patterns are not exclusive to any single country. They appear throughout history in different empires and global powers. The difference lies in scale, and in the technological and economic complexity of the contemporary world. In a highly interconnected system, local actions can have global consequences. Conflicts can affect markets. Alliances can reshape regions. Decisions can reverberate across continents. This increases the pressure on major powers to act, to anticipate risks, to respond quickly to emerging challenges. But it also increases the margin for error and the potential for unintended consequences. In this sense, what is often labeled as arrogance may, in part, reflect the difficulty of managing power in a complex and unstable system. A system where every decision involves trade-offs, costs, risks, and uncertainties. Understanding this logic does not necessarily mean agreeing with it too, but it may help explain why certain behaviors persist over time, and why global politics often unfolds in ways that seem contradictory or difficult to predict. The search to understand the past has always been part of the human journey. We explore ruins, decipher ancient inscriptions, and investigate forgotten accounts. Each discovery expands our understanding of the civilizations that came before us, but it also reveals new questions. Questions that continue to drive our curiosity. Because history is not just a record of the past, it is a continuous path of discovery. Because some secrets of history are still waiting to be revealed.